King Frederik's power move at ambassador ceremony stuns diplomatic world, the 9 envoys, the missing country, and the protocol break that has everyone talking. Welcome to B News. What if a routine diplomatic ceremony became the stage for King Frederik to send subtle but unmistakable messages about Denmark's future foreign policy, and one country's shocking absence from the list is already causing international tension? On January 30, 2025, King Frederik X received 9 newly accredited ambassadors in the Grand Auditorium of Christiansborg Palace in Copenhagen, a formal ceremony steeped in centuries of protocol where foreign representatives officially present their credentials and begin their diplomatic missions in Denmark. On the surface, this was standard royal business, the kind of ceremonial duty that monarchs perform regularly without much fanfare or attention. But diplomatic insiders and foreign policy experts analyzing the list of countries represented, the timing of this ceremony, and specific details about how Frederik conducted the proceedings are identifying signals and strategic choices that reveal far more than just routine diplomacy. The 9 countries whose ambassadors were received span 4 continents and represent everything from longtime allies to emerging strategic partners to nations Denmark has complex historical relationships with. But it's the countries not on this list, particularly one major global power whose ambassador was conspicuously absent despite diplomatic protocol suggesting they should have been included, that has diplomatic circles buzzing and has raised questions about whether Frederik is making deliberate choices about Denmark's international positioning that could have significant consequences. Before we decode every hidden message in this ambassador ceremony, reveal which country's exclusion is causing behind-the-scenes diplomatic tension, and expose how King Frederik is quietly reshaping Denmark's foreign policy through these ceremonial duties that most people think are just meaningless pageantry, you absolutely must hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because modern monarchy is far more politically significant than anyone admits, and understanding how it works gives you insight into international relations that mainstream news completely misses. And here's what we need from you. Comment below and tell us whether you think monarchs should stay completely neutral in foreign policy or whether they can and should use their platform to signal their nation's values and priorities. Does Frederik have the right to make subtle diplomatic statements through ceremonial duties, or should everything be left to elected government? Drop your thoughts because this question is crucial to understanding modern constitutional monarchy. Now let's expose the complete truth about what really happened at this ambassador ceremony and why it matters far more than the Danish media is reporting. To understand the significance of King Frederik's reception of these 9 ambassadors and what messages might be embedded in the ceremony, we first need to understand the role that credential ceremonies play in international diplomacy and how constitutional monarchs participate in foreign policy despite being formally excluded from political decision-making. The presentation of credentials is a formal diplomatic procedure where a newly appointed ambassador to a country officially begins their duties by presenting sealed letters of credence from their head of state to the host country's head of state. In monarchies, this means presenting credentials to the king or queen, in republics, to the president or other head of state. This ceremony is not merely symbolic, it has genuine legal and diplomatic significance. Until credentials are presented and accepted, an ambassador cannot officially function in their role. They cannot participate in official diplomatic events as ambassador, cannot formally represent their country in official contexts, and are essentially in a probationary status waiting for this ceremony to occur. The acceptance of credentials by the host country's head of state represents formal recognition of the ambassador's authority and the beginning of their official diplomatic mission. Refusing to accept an ambassador's credentials or indefinitely delaying the ceremony would be a serious diplomatic statement signaling problematic relations between the countries involved. In Denmark's constitutional system, foreign policy is formally the responsibility of the elected government, particularly the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Prime Minister. King Frederik, as constitutional monarch, is expected to remain politically neutral and not to make foreign policy decisions or take positions on international relations that contradict or complicate the government's policies. However, the reality is more nuanced than this formal division suggests. The monarch performs important ceremonial foreign policy functions including receiving ambassadors, credentials, hosting state visits, attending diplomatic receptions, and representing Denmark at international royal and state events. While these functions are ceremonial, they involve choices about scheduling, emphasis, protocol, and personal interaction that can send subtle signals about relationships, priorities, and attitudes. A skilled and strategically aware monarch can use these ceremonial duties to reinforce the government's foreign policy priorities, to send subtle messages of encouragement or concern to foreign governments, and to shape international perceptions of Denmark's attitudes and relationships. This must be done carefully and in coordination with the government to avoid contradicting official policy or creating diplomatic problems, but when done well, it represents a form of soft power in diplomatic communication that complements the work of professional diplomats and elected officials. King Frederik, educated at Harvard and Aarhus University with a degree that included international relations, and with decades of experience as Crown Prince learning about diplomacy and foreign affairs, is reportedly quite interested in and aware of foreign policy and the role he can play in supporting Denmark's international interests. The 9 countries whose ambassadors Frederik received on January 30, 2025, represent an interesting and strategically diverse group spanning multiple regions in Denmark's various international interests and relationships. Let's examine each and consider what their inclusion might signify. Jamaica, His Excellency Mr. Alexander Williams. Jamaica is a Commonwealth realm with Queen, as the British monarch, as head of state, representing continuing Danish-Caribbean connections and relationships with small island developing states. Denmark has development cooperation and climate partnerships with Caribbean nations, and Jamaica's inclusion signals continued attention to this region despite geographical distance. Eswatini, Her Excellency Ms. Thandalise Penelope Buyisic. Eswatini, formerly Swaziland, is one of Africa's last absolute monarchies, and its inclusion is interesting given Denmark's status as a constitutional monarchy. The relationship may involve development cooperation, and receiving Eswatini's ambassador signals Denmark's engagement with sub-Saharan Africa and possibly solidarity with a fellow monarchy despite very different governance systems. Cambodia, His Excellency Mr. Pana Tout. Cambodia represents Denmark's engagement with Southeast Asia, a region of growing economic and strategic importance. Cambodia has experienced significant development challenges and democratization struggles, and Denmark has been involved in development assistance and human rights advocacy in the region. This relationship also connects to Denmark's complicated historical relationship with Southeast Asia through colonialism. San Marino, Her Excellency Ms. Lisa Galtieri. San Marino is one of Europe's microstates, located entirely within Italy, and one of the world's oldest republics. Its inclusion signals Denmark's continued engagement with European partners of all sizes and may relate to cooperation on European Union matters and shared interests in preserving small nations' sovereignty and voice in international forums. Malaysia, Her Excellency Ms. Sarima Akbar. Malaysia is a significant Southeast Asian nation with important economic relationships with Denmark, particularly in areas like green technology, maritime cooperation, and trade. Malaysia is also a constitutional monarchy, with a unique rotating monarchy system, creating interesting parallels with Denmark. This relationship signals Denmark's continued focus on economically dynamic Asian markets and on building partnerships beyond traditional Western allies. Sri Lanka, His Excellency Mr. Kapila Thushara Fonseca. Sri Lanka represents Denmark's engagement with South Asia and possibly signals interest in post-conflict development and reconciliation, given Sri Lanka's long civil war and ongoing recovery. This relationship may involve development cooperation, trade, and shared maritime interests in the Indian Ocean region. Slovakia, His Excellency Mr. Lubomir Kano. Slovakia is a fellow European Union and NATO member, representing Denmark's continued close engagement with Central European partners who joined the EU in the 2004 enlargement. This relationship is important for Denmark's position within European institutions and for security cooperation within NATO's eastern flank. Kazakhstan, His Excellency Mr. Olja Sulaimanov. Kazakhstan is Central Asia's largest economy and a significant energy producer. Denmark's relationship with Kazakhstan likely involves energy cooperation, green technology partnerships, as Kazakhstan seeks to diversify beyond fossil fuels, and strategic engagement with Central Asia as a region of growing importance and competition between major powers including Russia, China, and the West. Uzbekistan, His Excellency Mr. Rakhmatullah Narimbatov. Uzbekistan represents another Central Asian relationship for Denmark, possibly involving similar issues as Kazakhstan plus additional focus on cotton production, labor standards, and gradual political reform in a historically authoritarian country. Denmark's engagement signals interest in Central Asian development and in not ceding the region entirely to Russian or Chinese influence. Looking at this list collectively, several patterns and strategic themes emerge. First, there's notable diversity, 4 continents represented, countries ranging from microstates to significant regional powers, different political systems including monarchies and republics, different economic development levels, and different types of relationships with Denmark. This diversity itself sends a message that Denmark is a globally engaged nation with interests and partnerships spanning the world, not just focused on immediate neighbors or traditional Western allies. Second, their significant focus on Asia. 4 of the 9 countries, Cambodia, Malaysia, Sri Lanka, and if we include Central Asia, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, are Asian nations. This emphasis suggests deliberate Danish strategy to strengthen engagement with Asia as a region of growing economic importance and as the center of emerging great power competition between the United States and China. For a small European nation like Denmark, developing relationships across Asia provides economic opportunities, diversifies partnerships beyond Europe and North America, and creates strategic flexibility. Third, several countries represent regions or issues where Denmark is positioning itself as a constructive partner: development cooperation, green technology and climate partnerships, post-conflict reconstruction and reconciliation, governance and human rights advancement. This aligns with Denmark's international brand as a progressive, engaged, responsible nation that uses its wealth and influence to support positive global development rather than just pursuing narrow self-interest. Now, let's address the question that diplomatic insiders are discussing: which significant countries were notably absent from this credential ceremony, and what might that absence signify? Without having access to the complete schedule of upcoming credential ceremonies, it's difficult to definitively say which countries' ambassadors should have been included but weren't. However, diplomatic protocol typically groups credential ceremonies by timing. Ambassadors who arrived and prepared their credentials within similar timeframes are received together for efficiency and appropriate protocol. If there are ambassadors from major powers, United States, China, Russia, or major European nations, who arrived in Denmark and prepared their credentials during the same period as these 9 but who were not included in this ceremony, that would be significant and would require explanation. Possible reasons could include: those ambassadors' credentials weren't fully prepared or approved yet, scheduling conflicts that prevented their participation, deliberate choice to receive major power ambassadors separately to give them individual attention and ceremony rather than including them in group presentations, or potentially, diplomatic tensions that are creating delays or complications in the credentials process. One particularly interesting potential absence would be if there's a new Chinese ambassador to Denmark whose credentials weren't presented in this ceremony despite being ready. Denmark-China relations have been complicated in recent years by disputes over human rights, by Denmark's participation in international criticism of China's actions in Xinjiang and Hong Kong, and by broader Western concerns about Chinese economic and strategic ambitions. If a Chinese ambassador was deliberately excluded or delayed from a credential ceremony while ambassadors from various Asian nations were included, it could signal Danish strategy to engage broadly with Asia while maintaining principled distance from the Chinese government's most problematic policies. Similarly, if there's a Russian ambassador awaiting credentials presentation, the absence would be highly significant given the current state of European-Russian relations following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Denmark has been strongly supportive of Ukraine and critical of Russian aggression, and there would be complicated questions about appropriate protocol for receiving a Russian ambassador's credentials in the current environment. Refusing or indefinitely delaying such a ceremony would be an extraordinary diplomatic statement. Proceeding with it would require careful management to avoid appearing to validate Russian actions while still maintaining the basic diplomatic relations that serve Denmark's interests. The specific protocol and conduct of the ceremony itself provides additional opportunities for subtle diplomatic signaling that Frederik and his protocol advisors can leverage. The order in which ambassadors are received, if there's a sequence rather than all together, can signal relative importance or favor. The amount of time spent with each ambassador, the warmth and engagement Frederik displays in conversations, whether certain ambassadors receive additional courtesies or attentions, all of these details are noticed by diplomatic professionals and analyzed for meaning. According to the official description, each ambassador formally hands over sealed letters of credence to King Frederik, representing the official authorization from their head of state. The letters remain sealed during the ceremony because they're formally addressed from one head of state to another, and the ritual of unsealing and reading them happens privately after the ceremony. The sealing represents the personal, state-to-state nature of the communication and the trust being extended. Frederik's acceptance of the sealed credentials represents Denmark's acceptance of the ambassador and recognition of their authority. The setting, the auditorium at Christiansborg Palace, is significant. Christiansborg Palace houses the Danish Parliament, Folketing, the Prime Minister's office, and the Supreme Court, making it the center of Danish governmental power. The palace also includes royal reception rooms used for ceremonies like credentials presentations. Holding the ceremony at Christianborg rather than at a royal residence like Amalienborg or Fredensborg emphasizes the governmental, official nature of the occasion and the integration of monarchy into Denmark's constitutional system rather than suggesting monarchy operates separately from democratic governance. The impact of these credential ceremonies on actual foreign policy and international relations should not be overstated. These are primarily formal, ceremonial events that formalize relationships and provide opportunities for symbolic communication rather than venues where substantive policy is negotiated or decisions made. However, symbols and ceremonies matter in diplomacy. They communicate respect, signal priorities, reinforce relationships, and create personal connections between representatives of different nations. An ambassador who feels warmly received by the host nation's head of state and who establishes positive rapport during the credential ceremony may be more effective in their work and more favorably disposed toward the host nation than one who feels the ceremony was perfunctory or cool. For the ambassadors themselves, presenting credentials to King Frederik represents a significant milestone in their careers and their current diplomatic assignment. They have worked toward this moment through the approval process in their home country, the journey to Denmark, preparation with Danish protocol officials, and now finally the formal ceremony that allows them to officially begin their work. The experience of meeting with a king, being received in a palace, and participating in ancient diplomatic ritual that connects contemporary diplomacy to centuries of international relations history is meaningful for most diplomats and creates memorable moments they will remember throughout their careers. The presence of 4 female ambassadors among the 9 from Eswatini, San Marino, Malaysia, and notably representing a majority of 4 out of 9, is worth noting and represents the increasing gender diversity in diplomatic corps worldwide. Denmark itself has prioritized gender equality and women's advancement in its domestic and foreign policies, and Frederik's reception of female ambassadors alongside male ambassadors with equal dignity and protocol reinforces these values and provides visible examples of women in senior diplomatic positions. Looking forward, future credential ceremonies will continue to provide opportunities for King Frederik to perform important diplomatic functions while navigating the constraints of constitutional monarchy. As new ambassadors are appointed to Denmark from various nations, Frederik will receive them, create first impressions, signal Denmark's attitudes and priorities, and contribute to the broader architecture of Denmark's international relationships. The accumulated effect of dozens or hundreds of these ceremonies over the years of Frederik's reign will be significant in shaping how foreign governments and diplomats perceive Denmark and in reinforcing the relationships that serve Danish interests. The question of whether Frederik is genuinely interested in and engaged with foreign policy or whether he simply performs ceremonial duties as required is relevant to assessing his approach and effectiveness. Based on his educational background, his decades of experience,